The numbers around him now vastly diminished. Blackrot strode forwards and drew his blade. Unlike most warriors, his sword had no scabbard. Instead, it lay buried, up to the hilt, inside his body, simply pushed in like a stab wound through a pustulant-ringed sore that marked the permanent point of entry. Even his chaos armour, a materialization of demonic interference, had evolved around the blade as an undeviating, purposeful fissure. With the blade drawn, his vile black blood dripping from its edges as he pointed it challengingly towards Treatmen, who had just finished off the last Skaven that had attacked him, and his eyes met the massive, bulky form of his adversary. His entire presence then focused upon Blackrot. In acknowledgement to the challenge, Treatmen rushed towards him, swinging his great sword around in an arc. This first strike collided with Blackrot's shield, almost completely stopping the blade from moving. It felt as if some teeming but unseen mass along its surface was trying to stick the weapon to it. Using only part of his strength to push the blade back, Blackrot threw his shield out to the side, causing the warrior priest to stumble backward slightly. Using the opening, the Chaos Champion lashed out with his own sword, aiming to take the Varenian warrior priest's head clean off his shoulders. Treatmen barely managed to dodge it, although he took a shallow cut to the cheek, which felt as if it burned like acid or some other corrosive substance. Blackrot's blood was a natural, living poison, and the weapon was covered in it. The remaining mutants weren't worth the trouble compared to the danger that some of these creatures presented. This was evident as Dieter sent one flying backwards with just his staff. This did surprise him, however, as he hadn't put much strength behind the attack. It was possible that the tormented creature had some sort of mutation that decreased its weight. The man did look rather gaunt, almost ghoul-like. This just proved that not all mutations were beneficial to the occupier. Tordrad gutted one of the remaining Skaven. They had faced several of the beasts during their stay within Middenheim. They had learned that the rat men would attack from the shadows and in large numbers, using it to their advantage. So for the group, being able to fight at last on more even odds made the Skaven become increasingly cowardly as the fight drew on. Meanwhile, Tobias and Rysandria were now left in the clear. The two of them had very little left to offer the group in terms of help, and as such, the remaining creatures were being dealt with by Dieter, Tordrad, and Olga. The Shalyan priestess had been worried about the overall outcome, but even the most severe wounds that they had received were nothing that both Dieter and herself couldn't handle given enough time. Tobias was bored. The beast men had run before he had a chance to deal with them. Whatever had happened over near Dieter had caused the whole lot of them to run. He looked around hungry for battle, and he could see the remaining mutants and Skaven were being held off and pushed back into the entry tunnel. The halfling did, however, notice a small amount of movement out of the corner of his eye as the Nurgle sorcerer raised his only working arm in one last gesture of spite. Maestro looked over in the direction of the sorcerer, and he didn't need to try and force himself to see the etheric energy flowing around the man of chaos. The spell was going out of control and rather fast. He himself was far enough away, but the other two were too close to the epicenter of what was going to happen, and he found himself calling out without thinking, "Tobias! Rysandria! Move out of the way quickly! That spell has too much power flowing through it! I don't know what the backlash could do!" Heeding his words, the two began to move as quickly as they could before the spell could be finished. However, before they could get away, an explosion rang out, followed by a magical shockwave that knocked them off their feet. Maestro was close enough to be pushed back a little by the blast. Whatever the spell was to be, they wouldn't know, for the burn on his arm began to turn into some sort of glowing rock-like substance, and it began to extend up the sorcerer's arm until it covered his entire body. The man, if you could even call him that, was turned into a statue, completely black in colour, and his face contorted into a mask of pain and horror. The large and deadly-looking shape of energy that comprised of the other spell the sorcerer had been casting dissipated away at this, just as vile demonic features formed enough to see a sharp-toothed glower, had anyone been interested to have looked at that moment in time.
If that is all you can do, priest, then perhaps my master's fear of you being able to interfere with his plans is unfounded.
Blackrot dropped his shield and used his now free hand to pull on the great sword that was lodged into him, sending it deeper into his own body with some effort. Caught off guard, Tristram fell forwards and was impaled upon Blackrot's now uprising sword, the blade's corrosive effect tearing through the warrior priest's armour like it wasn't even there and piercing his body with little effort as it went all the way through and out the back. Blackrot continued,
It seems that you are unfamiliar with fighting true chaos, boy. You weren't even worthy of my time.
As he said this, Tristram was muttering something. Blackrot could not hear what, but the words were arcane in nature. Tristram then weakly raised his arm and quickly slammed his hand into Blackrot's face, a holy passage bringing the truth of his foe's purpose recited. As he did so, images flashed through his mind. The form of Blackrot and 3 other figures he did not recognize were very prominent as they stood behind a 5th figure in pitch-black armour with metallic wings protruding from his back, standing in front of a snowy and frozen landscape. Then a 6th figure came into view. This one was a woman, and she seemed to bear no mutations whatsoever until the image focused upon her face. Her eyes glowed with an etheric power that was uncommon among the wizards of the Empire, and no sound came at all when she spoke, but the words were clear even in the silence that followed.
The fall shall come from that which surrounds you on all sides.
There was something Kislevian in her features and in the surroundings of the vision. As Tristram saw all of this, his mind was overwhelmed by the sheer implications at stake. He knew the truth now. Blackrot let out a roar of agony as a divine fire burned within his body. He let go of his sword and placed both hands on the side of his head as a brilliant white light began to emit from his skin. Tristram fell to his knees with the sword still embedded in him. Rysandria had quickly rushed over to him as he pulled the blade out, wincing as he did so. The young priestess acted as fast as she could to remove his breastplate, although she had little knowledge of how this armour went on, let alone how to get it off. Tristram grabbed hold of her wrist and shook his head.
Leave it, unless you wish to contract whatever vile poison was on that blade,
he told her in a painful, strained voice. Rysandria tried to argue.
But I must do something. As a member of the Shallian priesthood, I can't leave any injured unattended.
Tobias's voice cried out.
Now is not the time for you to start citing your scriptures, fool girl. Now get down!
He was suddenly dashing towards her, dagger ready to strike. She moved to the side as fast as she could, which was almost not fast enough, as the halfling dove past her and leapt into the air. That was when she saw why Tobias had done what he did. Blackrot was towering behind her as Tobias's dagger struck true, tearing into the monster of a man. The momentum of his run had given him an edge against the champion's defensive mutations. Black blood erupted from the wound, spraying the poisonous liquid into the halfling's face. This would have normally been extremely dangerous and most possibly life-threatening to any who had been hit with such a large amount of the foul substance. But luckily, the mask the thief wore upon his lower half of face saved him from having the blood enter his mouth. Not risking anything, Tobias threw the mask aside, which was drenched in poison, as he readied his dagger once more. Tordrad appeared next to him, weighing his blood-soaked great axe in his hands once more. This was the weapon he was most comfortable with, and considering how it felt somewhat lighter in his grip now, even with the exhaustion that he was feeling from the fight, he wondered how much he had grown over the weeks.